The snow that smothered the killing field outside Winterfell lay trampled and red-brown beneath a low sky of iron. The mid-afternoon light already failing, as though the very sun recoiled from what Ramsay Bolton had made here. Shattered shields jutted like gravestones from frozen drifts. Arrows quivered in the ribs of dead horses. Banners of House Stark lay sodden, their deery wolves matted with gore. In the hush after battle, the wind moaned between spear hafts, carrying the thin, ragged cries of wounded men who would never see another dawn. Ramsay rode among them on a smoky black courser, his cheeks flushed with exhilaration, pale eyes bright as two chips of topaz. He no longer bothered with the smiling flaying man cloak. Blood had spattered it into something darker, richer, better. Jon Snow's last charge had broken against Ramsay's crescent, like a wave against rock, and the North had been taught a lesson it would not soon forget. Near the mound where the giant 1-1 lay riddled by arrows, the bastard of Bolton dismounted and walked the ruin at his leisure. Every footfall crunched upon bone or frozen flesh. Every breath steamed in the cold. He found Sir Davos Seaworth kneeling over the limp form of a boy clad in stark gray. Little Rickon, still bound with the rope that had made him bait for an arrow. Sir Davos looked up, his good hand shaking on the hilt of a broken sword. Ramsay drew his dagger with a playful flourish and opened the old knight's throat, as though uncorking a wineskin, then wiped the blade on Rickon's hair before sliding it home. Mercy was wasted on traitors. He whistled, and a bevy of Dreadfort spearmen converged to strip armor, weapons, boots, anything of value from corpse and captive alike. Winter came for all. Efficient men made use of what winter left behind. At the Stark encampment beyond the jumble of bodies, the survivors knelt in rows with hands bound, guarded by Bolton men, whose pink flaying man badges were almost lost beneath new crimson. Ramsay inspected them as a buyer might inspect cattle. Lord Manderley's beard was clotted with ice and vomit. He glared with moon-pale eyes yet dared not speak. The Glovers, the Serwins, the Hornwoods, each house that had flocked to Jon Snow's direwolf banner, now bent knee or muttered prayers. Two of Smaljin Umber's kin tried to spit at Ramsay and were cut down where they knelt. The lesson spread like frost through the line. Silence or death, obedience or ruin. At the last he reached a cage lashed to an ox cart. Inside crouched Sansa Stark, cheek torn by riding through brush. Braid undone, cloak surrendered to hands that had been too eager. She stared at him with a fury so fierce it seemed a living flame behind her eyes. Ramsay smiled the way a cat smiles at a cornered mouse. "Sweetling," he said, brushing a crimson-slicked glove across the bars. "You left your husband too soon. I should like us to begin anew, after certain courtesies are satisfied." He signaled, and two kennel masters dragged forth the mangy hounds that had not tasted man-meat since Moat Cailin. Their ribs showed like fingers through skin. Their eyes were yellow-tinged and hungry. Sansa's gaze did not waver. "They will turn on you," she whispered, voice hoarse from shouting on the battlements. Ramsay's laughter rang cold across the camp. "Not while I feed them," he said, and turned to the prisoners. By sunset 3 northern lords were flayed upon X-shaped crosses outside Winterfell's broken gate. Their screams rose into the night with the sparks of Ramsay's victory pyres. He let the townsfolk watch, herded by spears to witness what befell oathbreakers. Inside the castle he claimed the great hall, seating himself beneath the leering direwolf banner that had once presided over Stark feasts. He ordered it pulled down and replaced with the flaying man. Crimson on pink, the colors of a dawn that promised perpetual dusk for the north. Roose Bolton's words echoed within him. A naked man has few secrets. A flayed man, none. But Ramsay thought secrets overrated. Fear was simpler. Fear was pure. Jon Snow's body was sought but not found among the dead. Some said the bastard of Winterfell had escaped amid the rout, vanished into the snow like a ghost of his direwolf sigil. Ramsay allowed the rumor to flourish. A hunted legend drew desperate men from hiding, and desperate men were easier to capture. He sent parties to every village from Torrhen Square to White Harbor, promising a silver stag for Jon Snow's head and a lordship for the man who brought him alive. Meanwhile, Winterfell's towers filled with ravens beseeching King Tommen in King's Landing to recognize Lord Ramsay as Warden of the North, in light of Stark treason. Other messages went to the Iron Bank of Braavos, reminding them who held the neck and the road to the wall. Coin followed where quills pricked parchment. Soon crossbowmen from the Twins, pikemen from Barrowton, even sellswords from Braavos, arrived to swell Bolton ranks. The North bled, and Ramsay drank deep of its lifeblood. Through long nights he wore Sansa down as one might wear stone with dripping water. He dined while she watched from chains beside the hearth, forced to smell roasted boar she could not taste, forced to answer soft questions with brittle silence. When she slept, if sleep it could be called, her dreams were of hounds tearing ground, of Jon riding from the trees only to fall again and again beneath a wave of Bolton spears. Dawn after dawn she awoke to the taste of ash. Yet still, her spirit did not break. Ramsay could see it in the set of her jaw, in the way she met his eyes without flinching. He began to relish the challenge. A lesser woman would beg, Sansa would bargain, and bargains, he knew, could bind tighter than chains. The first winter storm swept down from the Frostfangs, blanketing roads, clogging rivers with ice, sealing mountain passes. White Harbor closed its gates and turned inward, fearful of Bolton riders but more fearful of hunger. Lord Wyman lingered in dungeon chains, fed thin broth that did not satisfy his immense belly. When the third raven arrived from King's Landing without reply, Ramsay ordered the Lord's cooking to cease. A jailer whispered that Manderley wept for cakes and meat pies. Ramsay smiled, for tears were a prelude to obedience. So too with the Karstarks, who sent reluctant envoys beseeching forgiveness for harboring Stark fugitives. One envoy returned to Karhold with ears and nose removed. Another returned missing hands. Thereafter no further envoys came. Meanwhile, word of Ramsay's triumph drifted through the south like smoke on a chill wind. In Old Town acolytes gossiped that the bastard sire of Dreadfort would march upon the wall, seize the abandoned castles, perhaps even declare himself king in the north. In the Vale, Littlefinger weighed letters from Sansa that never arrived and wondered what price the North might command in silver and secrets. In Dragonstone, 2 newly hatched dragons keened beneath the stones, yet Daenerys was still across the sea, and her fires were distant. Only the Brotherhood without banners, hearing rumors of Stark defeat, sent red priests north to seek for signs amid the snow. None returned. But the North remembers, the saying went, and memory kindled sullen embers Ramsay could not stamp out. In hidden holdfasts sparsely marked on any map, Mormonts and Wildings nursed wounds and rage alike. Giants' Lance caverns welcomed the half-feral who would not bend the knee to a flayed man. In the barrow halls of the First Men, ghostly fires were lit before iron swords, and oaths older than Winterfell itself were spoken anew. Ramsay's dogs roamed far, yet resistance slipped through their jaws like smoke. Inside Winterfell, Sansa waited. She learned which guards were drunkards, which kennel masters loved their beasts more than coin, which maids whispered prayers to the old gods on cold nights. She whispered with them, quietly, patient as snowpack on a steep roof. She gathered fragments of loyalty. A kitchen girl smuggled notes inside hard-crusted loaves. A washerwoman dyed scraps of cloth direwolf gray and kept them under hearthstones. The words they passed spoke not of hope. Hope was a luxury, but of timing. Timing was steel. Ramsay sensed undercurrents yet found them delicious rather than dangerous. He liked a wolf to think itself unseen before he slit its belly open. When he took Sansa to wife a second time before the Heart Tree, he insisted she wear a gown sewn of flayed human faces. She refused. He struck her. She still refused. He had her dress woven instead from dire wolf pelts taken off Stark loyalists, and she wore it while the god's wood rustled with unseen wings. The ceremony was a blasphemy, the vows mockeries. But the witness of old gods could not prevent flesh binding to flesh. Afterward, Ramsay led his bride to the chamber once used by Lord Eddard and Lady Catelyn, a place heavy with ghosts. He stripped her there, meaning her humiliation to be total. Yet when he looked into her tearless eyes, he saw not defeat, but defiance, and for the first time in years, Ramsay Bolton felt the faintest prickle of unease. Outside, the dead of winter closed its fist. Snow buried the flayed men crucified on the battlements, until only blackened toes protruded from white drifts. Stores dwindled. Soldiers grumbled. Drinking water froze solid in the castle wells each night. Ramsay sent foragers south toward Barrowton and east to the rills. But wolves, real wolves, stalked the valleys, drawn by scent of carrion. Half the men who left did not return. Some nights the banners over Winterfell sagged under so much ice they tore free and drifted across the yard like wounded birds. Ramsay's fury became a blizzard of its own, scouring every hall. Still, Jon Snow eluded him, and each failure stoked rage hotter than any smithy forge. Then one dawn scouts dragged a captive through the gate. Tormund Giantsbane, beard frozen stiff, thigh gouged deep by a spear. They found him hunting elk beyond the last river, with half a dozen wildings. The rest lay dead or dying. Ramsay had Tormund chained in the kennels where the hounds could smell his blood through slats. Many nights he questioned the wildling chief, promising freedom in exchange for Snow's whereabouts. Tormund only laughed, a hollow sound that rattled chains. "The crow you want is smoke," he growled. "Hell ride the storm you've sown and make it your shroud." Ramsay broke 3 of the man's fingers and fed him nothing for 2 days. Still laughter echoed in the stone. Sansa heard Tormund's laugh, and felt a small spark flare low inside her ribs. She whispered to the kennel boy, who whispered to the smith's apprentice, who whispered to the girl who emptied slop buckets. That night the locks on the kennel cages turned easier than they should have. That night 2 bones slick with rendered fat found their way to the hungriest hounds. That night the moon hid behind restless clouds. When Ramsay came to gloat over his prisoner, the cages were open. The boy was gone, and the hounds were no longer hungry. They were angry. The kennel erupted in snarls and screams that reached the great hall in the instant wine touched Ramsay's lips. He spat red onto the tablecloth, leapt to his feet, and sprinted with torch in hand. By the time he arrived, Tormund had wrenched a spear from a fallen guard and jammed the bar of the outer door. Kennel masters lay like rag dolls, throats torn out, their blood steaming. Hounds padded through straw, lips strung with saliva. Ramsay raised the torch high, but where flame met the stink of blood, the beasts only grew wilder. Tormund hurled the spear. It grazed Ramsay's cheek, scoring a line that bled in the torchlight. Ramsay's answer was steel. He drew 2 daggers and went among the dogs as though dancing, slashing throats, hamstrings, bellies. Yelps shivered the stone. He hacked until straw was a slurry of blood and fur. Until Tormund's spear shaft cracked upon his back and the wildling tried to brain him with the butt. Ramsay wheeled, drove a dagger up beneath the giant's beard, felt hot breath wheeze across his wrist. When he staggered from the building, he left Tormund dead with 2 hounds gnawing his legs, and Ramsay Bolton's face was a mask of gore. Some his own, some not. He called for a maester to stitch the wound and a mead to chase away the chill, yet rest eluded him. In every hallway he heard the echo of wild laughter. In every rustle of fur he smelled treachery. He sent men to strip the kitchens of knives, to search every mattress for hidden needles, to beat confessions from stable boys. Fear bred loathing. Loathing bred violence. Violence bred silence. A hush settled over Winterfell so deep it pressed against ears like water. Sansa watched it all from behind lids lowered in seeming meekness. But within her mind maps unfolded. Of guard rotations, of crumbling wall sections, of snowdrifts deep enough to swallow footprints. Weeks turned to months. Spring should have scented the air by the first thaw, yet the long night lingered, a gray purgatory where crows gorged fat among parapets. Supplies ran thin despite Ramsay's raids. Smalljan Umber's kin abandoned their posts under cover of dark and slunk homeward, bearing tales of wolves that whispered vengeance. The men from the twins demanded double pay. When it was refused, they took it in coin pried from the dead and fled south. But the sea lanes were frozen. They vanished like smoke in the trees. All the while, Jon Snow gathered strength beyond Ramsay's knowledge. At a crofter's village beside a half-frozen lake, he rallied wildings driven southward by famine. Lady Lyanna Mormont joined him, bringing 32 warriors sworn to House Stark. Carved runes of the Old Tongue adorned their axes. The Glovers sent sons to make amends for their father's surrender. Even Barrowton's smiths, whose kin had died beneath Bolton blades, forged arrowheads and spear points through lonely nights. Rumor forged him into myth. The White Wolf, reborn by dragon's fire at Hardhome, immune to cold and steel. Where Ramsay sowed terror, Jon Snow. Woe we, Dean Snow. Snowfall hid their march. One morning Ramsay woke to horns echoing beneath Winterfell's walls. Not the clear, brassy blare of organized armies, but the haunting call of wood horns carved by free folk. Faint drums thudded beyond swirling flakes. The watch on the battlements shouted. Arrows loosed, thudded into nothing. Mist coiled, hiding shapes. Ramsay's pulse quickened, equal parts dread and exultation. Another battle at his gates could prove final, if he triumphed again. He ordered every able man to arms, posted crossbowmen at murder holes, lined spearmen atop the walls 3 deep. Fires were stoked so high the great hall's beams sweated tar. Yet inside him something shifted, a sliver of uncertainty that widened each hour Jon Snow remained unseen. At dusk a lone figure approached under a flag of truce. Ramsay watched from the gatehouse as the man dismounted. Tall, bareheaded despite the cold, dark hair limp with sleet. He carried no sword, only a bundle wrapped in black wool. When Bolton archers knocked arrows, Sansa spoke from her place beside Ramsay's chair. "He comes for you," she murmured. Ramsay almost struck her again but contented himself with a sneer. Out on the field, the figure knelt. Spread the woolen bundle, and rose hands empty. Then, turning slowly, he walked back into the white curtain. A horn blast sounded long, twisting like a nail through silence. Ramsay sent riders to fetch the bundle. They returned with a sack containing 6 human heads. His kennel master, 3 jailers, the lieutenant who'd failed to secure Tormund's cage, and 2 Karstark deserters. Each head bore lips stitched shut with horsehair. Pinned to one scalp was a strip of parchment, reading only beginning. Ramsay trembled with rage that no blanket of fur or woman's body could warm away. That night, he paced the battlements and planned torments so exquisite they would ring his name through history. He would break Jon Snow upon a wheel, feed Sansa piece by piece to starving dogs, salt Lady Mormont's head, and send it to every holdfast in the north. He saw it all in savage clarity. Yet each vision frayed at its edges, unraveling into the face of his father, Roose Bolton, stern and still beneath a lantern's glow, musing that a man might be king in the north one day and dog meat the next, if he played the game poorly. Morning brought a blizzard so thick that guard towers vanished from view of the walls. Beneath its cover, the White Wolf struck. Free folk scaled the east curtain where old repairs had left cracks wide enough for fingers. Northern archers picked sentries from the battlements one by one, arrows guided by the wind. Wilding axes split frozen oak, pouring fighters into the inner yard. Chaos bloomed like frost flowers. Silent yet deadly. By the time alarm bells clanged through the keep, the invaders were everywhere, their numbers impossible to guess amid whirling white. Ramsay rallied a knot of his best. Harrien Karstark's reavers, Dagmar's ironmen mercenaries, the last of the flayed guard, and fought through the fog toward the Godswood, thinking to seize Sansa as shield and prize. But Sansa was gone. In her place stood the old heart tree, its face bleached and bleeding crimson tears into the snow. Far off, a wolf howled, so close in timbre to a human cry, it seemed the grove itself lamented. Ramsay pursued shadows through twisting yards, cursing the snow that muffled footfalls. One shadow split his vanguard with a great sword of Valyrian steel. Long claw he recognized in horror, shearing iron like cheese. Jon Snow's cloak billowed behind him, direwolf sigil, snarling argent on sable, eyes bright as stars. Ramsay bellowed and charged, daggers out, but Snow parried with effortless grace, riposte carving a red smile across Ramsay's belly. Chainmail parted, warmth spilled into the cold. Ramsay staggered, swung wildly, found flesh once, twice, Snow's arm bled, but Longclaw came down, shattered a dagger, bit into bone. Ramsay fell to his knees beside the heart tree. Snow pressed the blade's point beneath Ramsay's chin. In that frozen heartbeat, Ramsay's life unspooled. Dreadfort kennels. Bastards' boys, the first flaying he witnessed. How his father learned to fear him. He thought of Sansa's eyes, blue and brilliant, seeing him now, seeing him fail. Rage flared, refusing surrender. But his limbs betrayed him, trembling with cold or blood loss or terror. Around them the blizzard cleared like curtains drawn aside, revealing the carcass of his reign. Flayed signs toppled, gates crushed inward, banners of direwolf and bear and spear streaming anew. Jon Snow's soldiers ringed the yard, silent, waiting. Yet the killing stroke did not come. Snow leaned close, his breath a cloud. "No," he said, voice soft as falling snow. "This death is not mine to give." He stepped back. From the broken archway of the keep walked Sansa, cloaked in white fur, face calm as midwinter ice. She carried no torch, no sword, only the leash of a gaunt hound with eyes the color of old bronze. Another followed, then 3 more, ribs sharp beneath patchy coats. They padded to Ramsay, sniffed, whined low. He tried to speak, to command, but lips stuck together with frozen spit. Sansa knelt, set a hand upon the largest hound's head. "They remember you," she said, voice carrying across the courtyard. "Though you fed them lies." She met Ramsay's gaze, and for the first time he saw not a girl, nor a wife, nor even a Stark, but the North itself, ancient and pitiless. "I leave judgment to them." She loosed the leashes. Hunger lunged. Snow turned away. By nightfall, the flayed man banners soaked in drifts were burned. Their ashes danced up chimney flues to mingle with stars. Sansa stood upon the battlements, watching embers spiral, while Jon knelt in the godswood to thank the spirits for victory and mourn the many who would not see spring. But beyond the broken walls lay a north still shattered. Houses ravaged, harvests lost, hearts weary of hope. Ramsay's war had merely begun a longer tragedy. The snows would melt, revealing graves without number. Wolves would clean the fields. Yet somewhere south, Littlefinger poised to tilt the game once more. In the east, dragons beat wings of shadow over a glittering sea. Winterfell had been reclaimed, but winter's tale was far from done. High above, snowflakes drifted through torchlight, catching fire for an instant before fading into the endless night, like memories of cruelty lost to time, yet never wholly gone, for the North remembers, and blood once spilled writes its truths upon the earth itself, indelible as scars upon living flesh. Cold dawn bled slowly across the sky, a thin wash of palest rose that did little to warm the shattered keep. Inside Winterfell's yard the night's fires still smoldered, sending up ribbons of smoke that caught the first light and hung there like phantoms reluctant to be dispersed. Men moved among heaps of debris in silence, stacking broken spears, dragging corpses toward a growing pyre near the breach in the east wall where the wildlings had swarmed through. Snow muffled every sound until each scrape of iron on stone seemed sacrilege. 1,000 scents mingled in the still air. Pine pitch, burned horseflesh, wet wool, frozen earth split to reveal the rich, loamy perfume of graves hastily dug. In that reek of death and victory, the North took its first, hesitant breath of what would come after Ramsay Bolton. Jon Snow stepped from the shadow of the ruined bell tower, his wounded arm splinted in a linen sling, hair stiff with frost. He paused to study the courtyard, tallying losses by the shape of the mounds. He counted giants among the dead. Mag the Mighty's kin fell far from the lands beyond the wall, recognized the pattern of Mormont shields lying split like pine cones, saw umber axes embedded in timber where men had fought back to back and died on their feet. He felt each name like a stone in the pocket of his soul. They had followed him because he had promised them a home free of flayed banners. They had died because winter was merciless. If he allowed himself to dwell on that reckoning, it would hollow him. So he moved instead, purpose thick in his veins. Near the smithy a line of prisoners knelt under watch. Bolton sergeants, Karstark outriders, mercenaries in patchwork armor. Some hung their heads in exhaustion. Others stared at John with expressions already empty of hope. Confronted by those who had helped Ramsay keep his grip, John felt a heaviness harder to swallow than grief. Part of him longed to turn away, to leave judgment to others sharper of law and colder of heart. But the faces of wildling children burned villages ago unfurled in his memory, and the echo of Rickon's last scream came behind them like a spear. Quietly he instructed the guards to separate the worst of the lot. Those bearing the flaying man on their cloaks, those whose blades he had seen rise first and fall last in the final stand. He spoke no threats. Winter could speak for him. When he was done, 200 men were herded toward the charnel gate, where fresh stakes waited, and the remainder were marched to the cellars to await the tender mercies of the new Northern Council. Justice, John supposed, had to start somewhere. He crossed the yard toward the great hall, now a pale husk veined with black soot. Its oak doors hung open to the dawn, and a hush drifted from within, broken only by the occasional crackle of embers in the hearth. Inside, the survivors of the Stark host gathered around trestle tables stripped bare. Mormont swathed in gray pelts, Glovers with their blue hand sigil painted hastily on shields patched with pitch. A smattering of Crannogmen leaning on frog spear staves, where Ramsay had once sat stroking visions of cruelty. Sansa Stark now stood, back straight hair unbound, but for a simple leather tie at the nape of her neck. She wore a gown of dark wool, and over it a mantle of snowy direwolf fur that seemed to drink the weak light and make it stronger, so that it glowed faintly around her like an aura. When John entered, she met his gaze and dipped her head, not in deference but in acknowledgement of burden shared. He took the space at her right without spoken arrangement, the spot his father had favored during feasts before that same hearth 15 years past. The memory fit crookedly atop the ruins of the recent night, and for a heartbeat he felt himself both boy and man, Ned Stark's son and Lord Commander and the White Wolf born of rumor. Murmurs stirred down the length of the benches. Outside, wind hissed in cracks of shattered glass. John lifted his hand for silence, surprised by the ease with which the room obeyed. "We have reclaimed Winterfell," he said, voice carrying though it remained low. "But the north is not mended in a single dawn. Houses were set at sword points against their neighbors, harvests were seized or burned, and wolves walk hungry in valleys where children once gathered berries. If we do not bind our wounds together, they will fester, and come spring we will find we bled ourselves to keep a castle of stones." A rumble of assent greeted his words mixed with pockets of doubt. Lord Glover, beard stained with soot, rapped knuckles on his shield. Lady Lyanna Mormont sat among men 3 times her size and stared him down with eyes that brooked no softness. "Words heal no children, Lord Snow," she said. "What of food? What of vengeance? The Karstark banners yet fly over Carhold, and the dread fort remains unclaimed. A snake can grow 2 heads if neither is cut off." Sansa spoke before John could reply, her voice soft yet clear. "The heads will fall, my lady. But if we use every sword to carve them, we will have none left to plow what fields the snows leave us." She swept her gaze across the hall. "We Starks are owed justice, I more than most. Yet I say this: feed the living first, and the dead will rest easier." There lay the root of her newfound authority. She spoke not as a lady craving redress, but as Winterfell itself, caring more for hearths stoked safe than for the savor of revenge. Arguments stirred, but John watched as older lords measured one another and found the sense in Sansa's words reflected back. They wanted to live more than they wanted to see Karstark blood freeze beneath the walls. Lady Mormont folded her small arms, lips thin, but she inclined her head an inch in concession. Yet one figure remained unmoved, a tall man cloaked in sable and snow-mottled mail who lingered near the rear pillar like a crow unsure whether to alight. When he stepped forward, murmurs resolved his name. Smaljan Umber's elder cousin, Huther, come to make amends for kin who had sided with Ramsay. His eyes were red-rimmed, jaw tight. "We will follow the Starks," he said, "but only if the Starks stand united." "My lady," he addressed Sansa, "you have courage enough for 10, yet you wear a Bolton's ring." A hush dropped like a stone. Many present had not seen the band that remained upon her finger, iron black and set with garnets like dried blood. Sansa's cheeks flamed, and she tugged at it as though surprised to find the shackle still there. But the iron refused the swell of her knuckle. Huther nodded grimly. "The North sees symbols. Burn that ring before the heart tree, and we will believe the bastard's line ended. Wear it, and ghosts may rise." "Mensau." Jon braced for Sansa's fury, but instead she exhaled slowly. "You speak true." she said, and slid her hand beneath her fur mantle to conceal the ring's glint. "When the godswood is cleared of bodies, the past will burn." That simple promise rippled outward like warmth from coals. Huther bowed, stiff and awkward, yet the gesture closed a wound that another speech might have widened. Jon's chest loosened as though cords had been cut. He turned the talks toward immediate needs. Quartermasters were named to inventory what provisions Ramsay had hoarded. Ravens would fly before noon to every holdfast still able to field carts, requisitioning saltfish, oats, and dried venison in exchange for future debts of grain, once spring planting bore fruit. Masons were tasked with shoring the eastern breach. Wildlings volunteered to fell timber in nearby groves. Healers set up tents in the godswood, where snowmelt trickled crimson from roots and stained the paths like veins. By the time the weak sun clawed above the keep's highest tower, an army of volunteers had replaced yesterday's army of killers. Jon dismissed the council. Out in the bailey he found Ghost atop the inner gatehouse, white fur luminous against soot-scarred stone. Forepaws dangling over the edge as the direwolf watched scavenger crows circle the far fields. Jon climbed the narrow stair to stand beside his companion. Ghost's flank pressed warm against his thigh. A silent confirmation that some bonds outlasted war. Together they scanned the horizon. Beyond Winterfell's walls, smudges of movement marked fishing folk from the river villages returning, hopeful that the castle's gates would welcome them after a year of exclusion. Smoke drifted from the direction of the old Carner houses. Funeral pyres for those who would never see the crypts. Jon rested his good hand on Ghost's ruff and realized he had not slept since the moment Longclaw opened Ramsay's flesh. The ache in his wounded arm pulsed like a second heartbeat. He descended to the hall reserved for the Lady of Winterfell. Inside, Sansa stood at a wash basin, scraping blood from her palms with a twist of linen. Steam rose from the water, and moonlight from an unshuttered arrow slit silvered her hair. She did not startle when Jon entered. Perhaps she had sensed him by some sibling instinct sharpened through catastrophe. "The prisoners you had staked," she said quietly. "I heard them screaming." Jon winced. "I tried to keep it distant." "It should not be distant," she replied. "We must own what we do to them." She finished rinsing, dried her hands on a length of toweling, and faced him. The purple bruises below her eyes looked garish in the weak light. "I meant what I said. Burn the ring and we begin anew. But the heart tree is fouled with the blood of men who sought shelter beneath it. We must cleanse it first." She paused. "We must bury Rickon." Grief opened inside Jon so sudden he almost staggered. In the rush of last night's storm he had pushed aside his brother's name lest sorrow sap his strength. Now the flood came, relentless. He found the wall with his back, clenched his eyes, but in darkness Rickon's face swam up, lashes beaded with snow, mouth slack in final surprise. He felt a gentle pressure at his wounded arm. Sansa's hand, warm through the sling's binding. "I will see to him," she said. "You must rest, Jon." He shook his head once. "I will rest when the wall stands safe." "Then you will never rest," she answered with a sad smile. "The wall has not been safe since the long night ended, and it will not be safe until the world ends again." She guided him to a bench carved with leaping fish, a Tully relic from her mother's dowry. "Sit." she commanded. So like their sister Arya, that John yielded without further protest. She poured him cider thick with honey and willowbark shavings and watched while he drank. The brew settled like hot stones in his gut, easing tremors in his hand. Only then did she speak again, lower, as though walls had ears. Littlefinger waits in Moat Cailin with Knights of the Vale. He will come soon. Then, John grimaced. To claim reward. To claim me, Sansa said. He thinks himself my savior. He will want a throne to stand beside. Jon's thoughts churned. When the Vale host had failed to arrive in the thick of the Knights' assault, his opinion of Littlefinger had sunk from suspicion to contempt. Now the prospect of Baelish marching unopposed through the neck chilled him worse than any wind. We will face him, he said. Together. Sansa's eyes glossed with shadows deeper than exhaustion. I fear facing him alone, but also fear what he might sow between us. He will whisper poison, Jon. He knows every fault line in our family. Now, then our answer is simple, Jon replied. We give him no cracks to widen. He rose, meaning to leave her to needed sleep. But she caught his uninjured hand. When we light Rickon's pyre, I wish Arya beside us. Her voice trembled. If she still lives, he swallowed. I will send ravens. She flinched at that, as though ravens had already carried too much sorrow. Jon squeezed her fingers. We will find her. He left before promise could become lie. Winter's day passed in a blur of labors. Wildlings hauled timbers. Cranagmen stitched leather waterskins from hides flayed off Ramsay's doomed mastiffs. At sunset, the gods' wood rang with axes cutting through frozen earth to make a grave for a boy who loved to chase fireflies. Jon swung the blade first, driving the iron into ground as hard as granite. Each stroke jarred his wounded arm, but he refused relief until Mormont warriors took the work from him by quiet insistence. Meanwhile, Sansa knelt beside Rickon's shrouded form, humming a lullaby their mother had once sung atop the library tower. The tune carried through the weirwood branches like the memory of summer lost. When the pit was deep enough, they lowered the small bundle. Sansa placed Rickon's favorite toy, an elk carved clumsily of pine by Hodor, upon his breast, and Jon set a swirl of pale wolf fur beneath his head so he would rest against familiar comfort. They filled the grave with handfuls of snow and earth until the mound rose level with the roots. Then Sansa stood, lifted a torch, and touched it to oil-soaked brush stacked high against the heart tree's trunk. Flames roared up, devouring Ramsay's ring nestled atop the pile. Garnets burst like seeds. Iron spat red sparks into the sky. When embers calmed, the heart tree's face shone through blackened ash, its carved eyes shedding slow sap tears that sizzled where they fell. Some swore the tree's weeping washed away the blood that had stained its roots. Others said those stains would never lift. Jon remained after the assembly drifted off, alone but for Ghost, who circled the pyre twice before settling at the mound's foot. The sky arched overhead, vast and bitter, stars hard as nails. Jon tilted his head back until his neck ached, seeking constellations his father had taught him. The hunter's belt, the maid's veil, the sword of the morning. Between them swam new patterns, cold and unknown. He wondered whether the old gods wrote portents with those bright stones, and whether men could read them. He heard soft footfalls behind him. Lady Lyanna Mormont approached, cloak too large for her small frame. She stopped shoulder to thigh with him, eyes never leaving the logs that still hissed. He was only a child, she said. Jon nodded. He could think of no solace to offer. Children die every winter, she continued, voice flat as iron. Yet somehow this death hurts more than 100. Perhaps because it was done by a man, not cold. Jon studied her, this girl who ruled an island and held her men with will alone. I wish I had reached him sooner, and I wish my mother had reached me sooner, after the great sickness. Wishes are wind. She fixed him with a gaze older than her years. You fought for him. That matters. He wanted to believe her. She drew a folded parchment from her belt. My maester wrote the tallies you asked. She handed the scrap. Grain stores in our holdfasts. We will bring what we can before the sea freezes solid, else our little ones will starve." John opened the parchment. The sums were dismal. He thanked her, promised runners to escort the carts, but she lingered, expression grave. "I saw you hesitate with the Bolton men," she said. "You are good-hearted. Good hearts can doom kingdoms. Keep your honor, but do not be afraid to let your captains dirty their hands." He met her earnest eyes and realized the North was looking to him, less as a brother in arms, and more as something larger. He felt no crown upon his head, but the weight was there all the same. He bowed to her, surprising her into a stiff curtsy. When she departed, he tucked the parchment close to his ribs and watched the last embers flicker to black. Sleep found him only when exhaustion made argument futile. He dreamed of cold rivers running red, of a direwolf looming over a throne of ice. The wolf's eyes were his own, and its howl shattered the throne to shards that became swords pointing south. He woke before dawn, heart hammering. In the dim corridor outside his chamber, 2 Mormont guards lounged, axes across knees. One rose. "Riders at the gate, my lord. Veil men." So Littlefinger had come. John shrugged on leather jerkin and slid Longclaw into its sheath. He descended the spiral as the first horn sounded from the ramparts, a cautious tattoo. Through the main arch, he stepped into cutting wind. The bailey seethed with men rousing from storm-hollowed sleep, scrambling into helms, seizing spears. Ghost bounded ahead, hackles bristling. Beyond the half-repaired east breach, a column of horsemen waited, bright plate polished to sunrise sheen, cloaks of silken sky blue emblazoned with the white falcon of House Aaron. At their head rode Sir Lyn Corbray, black hair streaked with silver, famous for a temper hotter than wildfire. At his side, swathed against cold in sable trimmed with crimson, sat Pettier Baelish. Snow dusted his shoulders like dandruff. His smile remained warm as hive honey. John moved to the edge of the breach, leaving a gap of broken ground between him and the newcomers. Baelish lifted leather-gloved fingers in greeting. "Lord Snow, or should I say King of the North?" John ignored the bait. "You are welcome to Winterfell, Lord Baelish, but your host will encamp outside the walls until quartermasters assess available stores." Baelish's green eyes flicked to where charred stakes still poked from fresh snow, the remains of Bolton prisoners. "I see Mercy runs thin this winter." "Mercy was starved," John said. "We feed justice now. Justice is usually expensive." Baelish dismounted with feline grace, handed his reins to an aide, and approached until only fractured stones separated them. "Fortunately, I bring gifts to ease the burden." He snapped fingers. A wagon rumbled forward pulled by 6 geldings. Its tarpaulin was whipped back to reveal sacks of flour, kegs of salt pork, casks of arbor wine. A rustle of interest passed through the gathered Northmen. "Payment will be discussed later," John said. Baelish's smile widened. "Payment has been arranged already, by my lady wife." He angled his head. "Lady Sansa, will you not greet your husband's benefactor?" Sansa stood atop the inner rampart, her white mantle stark against timber. She descended with measured calm and stopped beside John, but did not clasp the offered glove. "I greet my liege lord's vassal," she said, voice carrying, "and thank him for what aid he rendered." Belatedly, a flicker crossed Baelish's eyes. Hurt, or calculation disguised as such. He dipped a shallow bow. "My apologies. The neck remains treacherous. If I had thought to sprout wings like my banners, I would have arrived sooner. Bemdanao. Wings on rats seldom lift." Sansa replied softly. John sensed murmurs behind him. Baelish straightened, letting the jab pass. "No matter. I am here now." He glanced toward the keep. "Winterfell rises once more from ashes. How like a phoenix. Ah, but I forget. That is a southern tale. Direwolves do not burn so prettily." His gaze slid back to Sansa. "Shall we discuss the future, my lady? Privately, perhaps." "Anything you can say to me can be said before the North," she answered. Baelish's mouth tightened. "Very well." He turned to John. "The Vale stands ready to aid the North against any southern aggression. In return, we request only that Lady Sansa resume her place beside Lord Robin Arryn as his dearest cousin, guiding him through these perilous times. The Knights of the Vale under my regency will, of course, remain to garrison Winterfell until order is restored." The words dripped sweet as mead. The honey glazed a rusting dagger. The crowd muttered. John let silence stretch until even the horses blew steam nervously. Then he spoke, calm as still water. "Winterfell is held by House Stark. Its lady stands here. Its lord remains to be seen." He did not claim the title for himself, but those listening filled in the blank. "We thank the Vale for supplies. You may leave them inside the breach and camp 2 leagues east at the Weeping Water. A Stark escort will lead you." Baelish's lashes lowered. "And my proposal will be considered," John said, though even Baelish heard the words hollow echo. Sansa's gaze never wavered from Baelish's. "We will send response by Raven. In the meantime, I must prepare the crypts to receive the fallen." Menatrantua. Baelish understood dismissal when delivered politely. He bowed again deeper. A parody of fealty. Ace Winterfell commands. He pivoted, signaled his convoy. While guardsmen hauled kegs from the wagon, Baelish lingered at its tail, untying a smaller chest bound with silver clasps. He offered it across the breach, hands steady. John motioned for it to be placed on the stones. Baelish smiled faintly. "A personal gift. For Lady Sansa. I think she will find it freeing." With that enigmatic murmur he mounted, and the Vale host turned, banners snapping. When they had gone, John bent and unlatched the chest. A velvet cushion nestled inside, upon which glimmered a cruelty forged of gold. The broken halves of Ramsay's garnet-studded ring, hinges filed smooth so they could be rejoined into a torque fit for a queen. Sansa stood over his shoulder, silent. He thought she might weep, but instead she laughed, a brittle note that made Ghost's ears twitch. She closed the lid gently. "He dangles chains and calls them crowns." Her fingers tightened. "I will dangle them back." That noon the Northern Council convened again, but this time they met in the open yard, circle wide around the broken heart tree pyre. Wind skirled ash in eddies. John took no seat, preferring to remain among the men who had bled for mourning. Sansa stood opposite, cloak tails snapping. Between them lay 2 standards planted in snow. The direwolf of Stark, the flayed man scorched black. John raised his voice so ravens startled from nearby branches. "We have houses orphaned of lords. We have castles standing empty, grain silos half full. If we haggle, we will starve. I ask each house to swear now by ice and fire alike. Share stores until spring, and in return Winterfell will distribute southern tribute first to those who give most." Then Lord Wyman manderly shuffled forward, leaner after dungeon months, yet still broad of shoulder. "I will swear," he croaked. "But only if the Freys are brought to account for my sons." Murmurs of Frey betrayal shivered through the ranks. John met the old lord's watery eyes. "The Freys will answer." He knew no details but vowed it anyway. Some promises, he reckoned, forged fate by being spoken. One by one the lords pledged. Glover, Hornwood, Serwyn, Tallheart kin come from shadowed valleys. Even Huther Umber knelt, pressing palm to snow. But when Alice Karstark stepped forward, thin, fierce, her hair a blaze of foxfire, bows tightened, she dropped to one knee. "House Karstark swears fealty anew," she declared, "but my cousins will not yield the Dreadfort." John weighed her. She was no friend of Ramsay, yet Karstark blood had stained Robb Stark's banners years before. Still, John saw in her eyes not defiance but a plea. Free her house from its shame. He beckoned her up. "Your cousins will yield or face siege. You, Lady Alice, will stand hostage until they answer." She nodded, relief flickering. "I will stand." The circle sighed like timber settling. As last vows were sworn, John felt a subtle shift. gravity tilting around a center newly formed. They would follow him, not with blind allegiance, but with eyes open, because the alternative was the return of a darkness none wished to name. Sansa stepped beside him and raised her arm. Sunlight glanced off the wolf's head clasp at her wrist, where her brother's ring once sat. "The North remembers," she said. "Let us not forget each other." Cheers broke thin as ice cracking, yet beneath the sound ran something sturdier than joy. Resolve hammered into iron. That night Jon climbed the highest tower. Stars glittered like glass shards spilled across velvet. Ghost lay at the stairs' base, guarding. Atop the parapet Jon found Davos Seaworth wrapped in a borrowed cloak, wounds bound and pale, but alive. The cut across his throat scabbed into an angry seam. The smuggler's voice rasped but held mirth. "Hope the wind's kinder than the healer's leeches." Jon stood beside him. "You should be abed." Davos shrugged, then winced. "I dream of a woman with a red smile. Bed gives her room to dance." His gaze shifted over rooflines. "You saw how Baelish looked at your sister." "I did. He will come again. With darker gifts." Jon nodded. "And I will be ready." He took a breath of air so cold it pricked lungs. "But there is worse on the horizon than Littlefinger. The dead march beyond the wall. I felt them at Hardhome." He turned to Davos, voice low. "We must unite every house, southern and northern, or none will live to see summer." Davos' eyes reflected starlight. You'll need more than northern vows." He scratched his beard, feeling the stitched wound. "Perhaps a dragon, or 3. Jon smiled without humor. "If such creatures still breathe." "Word from Old Town claims they do, across the narrow sea." Davos gave a hollow chuckle. "Never sailed so far." Jon followed the sweep of the horizon, imagining wings darkening moons. "Perhaps we must," he said softly. "But first, Carhold, the Dreadfort, and food for the children." Davos clapped his good hand on Jon's shoulder. "One oar stroke at a time, lad." Below, Winterfell's courtyards glowed with new fires. Smiths hammered at bent steel, sparks flaring like fireflies in June dye. Voices rose in rough song, a stitching of many tunes, but they wove together into something strong. Jon closed his eyes and listened. It sounded like life refusing surrender. A week later, as scouts prepared to ride for Carhold under Aelys Karstark's banner, ravens arrived from the wall. Maester Clydas' cramped script bore dire tidings. The last patrol beyond the Shadow Tower had vanished. Blue lights were seen dancing on the fist of the first men, and wildlings fleeing south reported an army of dead crossing the Frostfangs. Jon read the letter beneath the weirwood's bare limbs, sap bleeding from fresh axe hews. Each line tightened his throat. The war he had planned for was moving faster than his broken north could wheel. Sansa found him there, letter limp in wind. She scanned his face. Saw enough. "The storm comes." "Yes." He looked at her, surprised that fear felt distant. His pulse slowed, thoughts shaped by duty. "When it breaks, men like Baelish will flee south. Houses that swore today may bend tomorrow." He held up the raven's parchment. "The Night's Watch calls us." She stepped into his shadow, fingers sliding through his. "Then, we answer." 2 mornings later, Jon rode from Winterfell at the head of 500 chosen. Mormonts with silver-edged axes, Glovers on shaggy mounts, Karstark archers seeking redemption. Beside him rode Tormund's brother, Shieldbreaker, sworn to avenge kin, his hair braided with bones. Davos carried Stark banner, the first time a man not of the blood had done so. Sansa stood on the battlements, cloak snapping like a sail, watching until the column disappeared into the white hush of dawn. In her chamber that night, Sansa opened Baelish's chest again. She held the welded torque between thumb and forefinger, the garnets dark as clotted wounds. Then she took up a hammer stolen from the forge. The first blow rang through timber like a church bell. The second shattered gold across flagstones. She scattered the shards in the hearth where flames consumed them. Sparks spiraling up the chimney into the hungry sky. When she turned, Brienne of Tarth waited in the doorway, newly returned from scouting the king's road. "My lady," Brienne said, "the Reachmen muster south of the Neck." Some bear Lannister crimson, some Tyrell rose. Sansa's eyes narrowed, glowing embers in the firelight. "Summon the council," she said. "The North remembers, and the North will ride." Jon's host reached the last river on the third day to find its surface a glaze of black ice. They skirted west and crossed by night. The crack of hooves muffled. Wilding scouts reported tracks ahead. Men in mail, moving swift, bearing none of the banners of the North. On the fourth dawn, Jon crested a ridge and saw smoke from the direction of the Dreadfort. Too thin to mark siege fire, too heavy for chimney fires. He dispatched riders to investigate. Heart clenched. When they returned, faces pale, they spoke of Winter's children, the undead, already at the Bolton seat. The walls silent, the courtyard a pit of corpses stirring in unlife. Jon's council gathered under spruce boughs, breath steaming. Eddie's Karstark trembled not from cold, but terror. "If the dead hold my cousin's walls, they will pour south along the King's Road." Jon stared north where clouds lay like bruises. "We had hoped for moons," he murmured. "We have days." Shieldbreaker spat. "Then we kill them here, before they thicken." Jon traced a route in snow. The weeping water, the hills of Last Hearth, the maze of old barrows, defensive lines his father had described on winter nights. "We hold the barrows," he decided. "Between earthworks older than the kingdoms, beneath swords planted by the first men. The dead may not fear, but they can be slowed. Our children may starve behind those lines," Davos warned. "They will not starve if our flanks hold," Jon said, a fierce light kindling. In that moment he felt destiny's hand, cold and firm behind his heart. He thought of Melisandre's murmur, that great victory requires great sacrifice. He rejected the echo, but accepted the price. Send a raven to Winterfell. Tell Sansa to ready every hearth for refugees, and to send what riders she can spare to the Barrowlands. We will make our stand. He mounted, lifted Longclaw. Steel caught sunrise, flashed. 500 voices answered, some trembling, some bold. They rode, hooves churning snow, banners streaming. Direwolf, bear, sunburst, and the strange stitched insignia of free folk tribes. Behind them, ghostly mists rose, but ahead the horizon spread brilliant, with a dawn that promised no warmth, yet held the fragile promise of light. At Winterfell's loftiest window, Sansa watched the raven vanish beyond clouds. She turned to Brienne, who stood sentinel. "He goes to war against death itself," she whispered. Brienne inclined her head. "And death has never faced a stark woman with an army at her flank." Sansa smiled, the expression sharp as steel. "Then let it learn the lesson Jon began." She descended stone steps where torches guttered, summoning lords to muster. Outside, smiths hammered day and night. The ring of steel upon anvil rode the wind like a clarion call. Children packed arrows with goose feather fletching. Old women boiled pine resin for firepots. High above, the shattered flaying man banner remained lashed to a stump of beam on the roof. Sansa left it there, a warning to all comers that Winterfell had been claimed by darkness once already, and that darkness had been burned to ash. Night fell. Northern fires blazed from Carhold to White Harbor, signal beacons passing word of the coming storm. In the Godswood, the heart tree bled again, its sap reflecting the flames. Sansa knelt at its base and pressed her palm to frozen bark, feeling the slow pulse of veins far older than her bloodline. She closed her eyes and sent a silent prayer to any god still listening. Protect him. Protect them all. When she rose, she carried a root's resolve. Beyond the wall, winds howl. In the Frostfangs, blue eyes opened in skulls rhymed with ice, and a cadence of cracking echoed as dead hands lifted ancient swords. But between that horror and the warm heart of men stood a broken land, stitched by courage, mending itself one oath, one breath, one heartbeat at a time. Winter had come. The North, awakened by pain and tempered in its own fire, stood ready to meet it. Ah, Kai. Wind harried the banners long before Jon Snow's new host glimpsed the ancient crowns of the Barrowlands. An endless hiss rose off the drifts. The sound of grain poured upon stone. and every gust carried the smell of something rotten somewhere upwind. The reek of the Dreadfort blackening on its own pyres. Yet 500 riders pressed southwest all the same, lances clacking at the walk, wool hoods rimed with blown frost. By the third day out of Winterfell, they had left the river valleys behind and entered a region of rolling mounds that looked, in winter's pallor, like the backs of monstrous white whales breaching a frozen sea. Each barrow was crowned by a tumble of standing stones older than recorded tongues. Beneath those silent caps slept kings who had worn bronze before the Andals learned iron. Jon remembered old Nan's tales, that the dead beneath the hillocks would rise should anyone disturb their rest, and wondered whether prophecy or simple rot first gave the rumor life. He conferred at dusk with Davos, Alys Karstark, Shieldbreaker, and the dark-eyed Ravenkeeper from Bear Island, whose name few could pronounce. Their map, a scrap of tanned elk hide, showed 3 rings of burial mounds, the innermost encircling the King's Barrow, where every northern king of the Dawn Age supposedly lay in a stone boat ready to sail the sky. The outer ridge faced the road like a natural rampart. Jon traced a finger along the high ground and said, "Our line is here. Dig trenches between the barrows. Pack the spoil with logs and frozen clay. Every third ditch will be soaked in pitch." Davos coughed against the wind's knives. "How many torches do we have?" "Too few," Jon answered. "But pine knots burn long even when wet. Night lampposts every 50 yards. Any white crossing the trenches burns. The trench behind stays dry for retreat." Alys Karstark frowned at the white sweep of mounds. "If the others bring storm, torches die quick. Then the pitch burns anyway." Shieldbreaker grunted. He stood broader than a small bear, and his beard held beads of ice like sapphires. "We fight with earth and night both." "That is old wildling wisdom." Jon accepted it. They had no maesters now, no Magi. Only practical hands and hard-ground truth. He ordered the companies to divide. Mormonts on the northern arc, Glovers the western curve, Karstark archers at the southeastern dip, and wildlings roving where the line folded into barrow hollows. Gorse-covered copses supplied stakes. Ruined farmsteads yielded ox carts and floorboards for palisade braces. By moonrise, hundreds of figures moved about the snowy whalebacks like ants building a matchstick redoubt for some invisible queen. During the first midnight watch, Jon walked the ridge seeing to fires. Mormont axemen hacked tomb doors out of frozen earth to uncover limestone slabs they rolled across open trenches for bridges that could be pulled away in moments. Davos directed them, voice raw from earlier wounds, but carrying above the clamor. Beyond, the sky had taken on a violet sheen, the stars smothered by high cloud that glowed like a bruise. Ghost padded at Jon's heel. Occasionally the direwolf stopped, ears canted toward the northeast. Fur lifted along his spine, as though listening to something Jon's dull human senses missed. When at last the beast gave a low, questioning whine, Jon swung a lantern in that direction. The fields beyond the outer barrow line lay empty, save for wind-driven snow devils, but an unease wormed beneath his breastbone, all the same. He sought sleep in a stone-roofed tomb barely large enough for a dozen bedrolls. The stale air smelled of lichen and forgotten rites. Torchlight threw long shadows over rough-hewn wall reliefs. Warriors with crescent shields, women cloaked in raven feathers, wolves larger than horses. Jon lay between Davos and a snoring Glover sergeant, cloak clutched tight. He dreamed of the wall weeping liquid moonlight, which pooled between his fingers until his skin cracked. When he woke, pre-dawn blue seeped through the tomb's doorway, and the horn of the watch moaned 3 notes. Danger. Then another horn. 4 notes. Wildlings used 4s, but the pitch reeked of terror. Jon was on his feet before breath met cold. Outside, pink dawn limned the rim of the eastern clouds, yet the world beneath was neither day nor night. A rolling gray mist marched southwest from the direction of the Dreadfort. Its front advanced by gusts that flattened snow crusts and shimmered with halos of hoarfrost. In that mist, thousands of pale points flickered, blue and cruel. Eyes. The dead had arrived. He shouted orders, and men scrambled to posts. Wildling horns answered, deep and ragged like aurochs bellow. And across the ridge torches hissed to life. Archers knocked fire arrows dipped in pine sap. Slingmen filled pouches with clay pots. Sloshing pyromancers oil scavenged from an abandoned watchtower. Snow muffled every heartbeat. John vaulted a ramp of logs to the highest barrow crest. There he saw them clearly. A sea of corpses in shredded mail or peasants' rags, bareheaded despite the cold faces ash pale, beards touched with rime. Many bore the sigil of the flayed man, some the sunburst of Karstark retainers who had refused his call, a few even the red heart of former Baratheon levies long dead in earlier wars. The dead forgot banners, wore what flesh they retained like clumsy armor. Behind them, ghostly in the mist, rode the tall shapes of white walkers, 5 at least, astride pale horses whose hides stretched thin as parchment. Their swords glittered like fractured moonlight, and where they passed the very fog bent inward, as if each walker's presence sucked warmth from air. Joan's breath fogged thickly. The edge of Longclaw burned his palm through the glove, yet he drew the blade slowly, holding the hilt at eye level. The Valyrian steel drank sunrise, turning it bruised violet. "The trenches!" he yelled, voice cracking under wind. Pitchmen set torch to coiled straw. Dot dot. Flames rushed along grooves of oil until 30 yards of ditch became a ribbon of orange roaring life. Snow hissed. Steam mushroomed. The vanguard of whites reached the fire and found no path. Their dead flesh blistered, popped, and those behind climbed atop them heedless, forming a living bridge of charred bodies. Glovers heaved the first palisade braces into position. Mormonts hurled axes. Every moment became a matter of breath and heartbeat. A firepot's arc, a spear thrust timed between 2 whites, a shield broken atop a cousin's corpse. No horns conveyed orders once metal clashed. Sound itself was devoured by the crackling ditch and the howling of revenants. John fought where the northern arc bowed. Archers behind dropped arrows faster than bowstrings should survive, their fires licking snow-blind. When a gap opened in the trench, oil spent, flames guttering, John leapt into the breach with 10 companions, Longclaw carving arcs through skull and collarbone. Dragon glass daggers glittered in Mormont fists. Wildlings slammed bone clubs tipped with black shards. Each white that fell burst into shards of ice, yet each gap filled with 2 more. A bear of a man from Clan Harclaw grappled a skeletal giant, both tumbling into the pit, fire whooshing upward. Ice cracked, steam rose. John lost track of faces, names, time. Lyanna Mormont fought beside him for a time, her small form nearly swamped by wildling furs. She braced a spear against her foot and forced it upward into the chest of an armored wight that had once been a Karstark great sword. The corpse toppled back, pulling her spear away. John heard her give a feral scream of triumph and moved on. Later he would look for her, but later had no measure. A horn cut through the din, 1 note deep. The call to reform. John risked a glance. The central barrow had fallen silent. Shapes crested its crown. Davos signaled with a flaming brand. The dead had found a natural cleft between barrows the trench had missed, and now spilled through. John retreated in bounds, covering each line of fighters as they leapt the inner ditch. Shieldbreaker appeared. Soaked in black blood, shield left behind somewhere. Dragging 2 Karstark archers by the collars. "Los the gap," he growled, voice cracking. Walker sighted. Indeed, atop the King's Barrow's ring wall stood a figure slender and tall, crystalline armor reflecting dawn. It raised a blade of ice and the corpses below surged as one, their moans rising into a single keening note that made men clutch ears. John knew he must meet that walker, or the line would break. He dashed for the burial ramp where limestone slabs formed steps slick with blood. 2 wildlings followed, but arrows from the whites cut them down. Ghost bounded past, white among the gray. The walkers had turned, eyes lit like forged steel in winter. John felt an invisible pressure, a weight of ages. He mounted the crest, snow sliding under boots, and swung Longclaw from low guard into a rising slash. Steel met ice with a sound like bells shattering. The walkers slid aside, quicker than thought, and riposted. John parried. Longclaw skittered sparks. Cold smoked from the alien metal. Frost crawled up John's glove, He forced the thought aside. There is only the blade, the next breath. The grounds give. They traded 5-10 strokes. Each of Jones' breathing spaces cost him a foot of ground. He ducked under an overhand sweep that would have opened skull. Ghost attacked from the walker's blind side. Its sword flashed, and the direwolf yelped, thrown aside bleeding white plumes into fur. The sight tore something inside John. Anger surged hot as forge fire, burning through fear's crust. He feinted left, kicked icy surface into the walker's shimmering eyes, and as the creature recoiled, he pivoted, swinging Longclaw in a two-handed cleave that met the crystal sword mid-arc. Metal and ice kissed. The Valyrian blade cut through like thunder-splitting rock. The walker's sword shattered. Shards tinkled down the mound slopes. Surprise flickered across those blue eyes an instant before Longclaw's edge found the gap beneath its jaw. The head flew separate. The body collapsed into wind-blown snow, limbs fracturing into dust. A sound like ironwood groaning filled the air. Across the field, every corpse within sight halted, shuddered as if strings had been cut. Some toppled at once, others spasmed before crumpling. The armies of men drew ragged breaths. John planted Longclaw point down and leaned, lungs burning, vision swimming. Below, Davos waved a torn pennant. The line held, but not everywhere. Messenger riders pounded along the ridge, snow kicked in plumes. One, a Serwyn youth missing half an ear, slid from the saddle. South flank breached. Giant white, Lady Lyanna. The words tangled. Grief did the rest. John pressed the boy's shoulder hard, then called for the reserve. An hour later they sealed the breach, pouring pine tar and flame into the ditch until the giant's corpse burned like an obscene bonfire. By noon the field lay quiet aside from the crackle of frozen flesh and the distant howl of retreating wind. No more walkers appeared. Whatever intelligence guided them had withdrawn for the moment, perhaps to weigh cost against gain. Snow began falling again, gentle as dust. John walked to carnage. They had lost a third of their number. Lyanna Mormont lay beneath a makeshift cairn of shields. She had faced the giant alone when the palisade fell, jamming a dragonglass dagger through its eye, even as its fist crushed her ribs. Shieldbreaker wept openly, letting the tears freeze upon his beard. There would be psalms, John promised. An island would fly her banner until dawnless ages. Over 50 wounded filled the tomb hospitals. Among them, the Raven Keeper, who had lost a hand yet still tended ravens with his remaining. When evening came, the dead were piled and burned in long ditches beyond the outer trench. The smell reached every pocket of the camp, a charnel incense. Under a sky bruised purple, John wrote 2 ravens. One to Sansa, hold Winterfell, but send every able healer and spare bow. Our line can hold if reinforced. The second to the wall. We fought walkers. 5. 1 slain by Valyrian steel. Countless dead. Need dragonglass men. Fire. Awaiting next assault. Send word if Eastwatch still stands. He sealed them with broken wax and left Davos to choose the birds swift enough to cross blizzard skies. The Raven reached Winterfell 3 nights later, delivered by fingers blue at the tips. Sansa read its broken lines by hearthfire, while Brienne, Maester Torwin, and Lord Wyman listened. When she finished, silence swallowed the hall. Flames guttered as wind pushed under doorboards. Sansa stood. Begin evacuation of outlying villages. Every cart rolls tonight. To Torwin. Strip the armory of spare you bows. Fletch 10,000 arrows. Use the goose down reserved for winter beds. To Brienne. Ready 200 horse. You ride at dawn with me. Wyman coughed, concern trembling his jowls. My lady, a Stark must hold Winterfell. She lifted her chin. Winterfell is stone. The north is blood. I ride to keep both. Arguments rose and faltered. Baelish's Vale knights muttered about oaths. Sansa quelled them with a look colder than any wind beyond the wall. She relayed Joan's instructions. Brienne would command rear guard along the King's Road. Maester Torwin would oversee infirmaries erected inside Winterfell's walls. The crypts would house children. Storerooms beneath the Great Keep, grain. Behind these orders, she set agents quietly to watch Littlefinger's every whisper. That night, in the silent hours when cinders glow long after flames die, Arya Stark stepped from the shadows of the Rookery Tower. She wore the face of a ginger-haired squire no older than 15, but her gray eyes belonged to wolves. Sansa's breath hitched. Arya. The squire's mask melted away, sinews shifting, false freckles fading, until her sister stood there in worn traveler's leathers. They embraced, armor creaking. No tears came. They had been exhausted long ago. Arya pulled back, expression flinty. "I saw the whites near the wolf's den," she said. "They move faster than ravens." Sansa nodded once. "Then we ride faster still." Arya offered a thin smile. "Who holds the reins?" "Jon Dot." "But will you ride with me?" "Then." "Always." Together they descended the tower to greet stragglers, arriving with news from the coast. Ships of hard-hand clans beaching near White Harbor. Fishermen claiming to have seen sails, black as night, far to the south. Rumors that Queen Cersei had sent sails north to plunder while winter devoured kings. Sansa filed each rumor like a needle in wool. She recognized that war broadened now. An outer ring of ice, an inner ring of iron and treachery. She must answer both. By dawn, 200 horse gathered in the yard. Northmen sturdy on shaggy ponies. Vale stragglers sworn over new oaths. 20 black brothers from the Shadow Tower who had slipped through undead lines. At Sansa's side rode Arya, wearing the liveried cloak of no house. Only a plain leather mantle the color of Stormcloud. Brienne commanded rear. Podrick Payne led a company of archers. Baelish stood watching from a battlement, lips curved in rueful smile. Snow fell in soft spirals, shrouding all fault lines beneath white. Sansa nudged her mare forward and did not look back. They moved along the King's Road in single file at first, hooves muted by fresh powder. Refugee columns trudged in the other direction. Farmers driven from barrow villages, fisherwives from the banks of the White Knife, even 2 maesters from Carhold leading children, harnessed to goats. When those refugees saw the direwolf banner flying, they broke into sobs or feverish cheers. Sansa distributed bread, ointment, blankets, until her saddlebags hung limp. Near the Weeping Water, they found a burned village still smoldering despite the snowstorm. Brienne's scouts located tracks of mailed heels leading northeast, Vale armor maybe, suggesting Baelish had not remained idle after all. Arya knelt by a half-buried corpse, fingers brushing charred cloth. Skulls pierced from behind, she noted. Execution. Whoever did this did not fear the dead. Sansa felt an ember of fury glow. She banked it for later. For now, the dead were the priority. They reached Jones' lines at midday 3 days later, preceded by ravens. Bran had warged into the camp hours ahead. Bran now rode a sled behind Mira Reed, having arrived at Winterfell the dawn Sansa left. His visions had sharpened to a needle, and he guided ravens like a lord enthroned in their bright black eyes. The sight that greeted Sansa hollowed her stomach. Trenches black with ash, barrow ridges pocked by artillery scars where firepots had burst, the ground outside stained to slurry by melted snow and ichor. Yet within that ring, men still stood. Pine torches lined the ramparts like a crown of sputtering thorns. Jon met her at the western stair, face drawn thin but alight when he saw Arya slide from her saddle. They embraced briefly, words unnecessary. Sansa handed the quiver bundles to Karstark archers, directed the healers to the tomb infirmaries, then followed Jon to a command pit dug beneath a leaning stone stele shaped like a wolf skull. There Davos, Alice, a maester from the Shadow Tower, and Shieldbreaker pored over a new map, etched directly on the frozen ground with soot. The positions of their trenches, the gaps where fresh earth still needed piling, the marks where walker sightings had been spotted the previous night. Jon gestured. 3 nights at most before the next assault. The walker I slew was not their leader. Bran's Raven saw a figure in armor of black ice 5 times since dawn. Each time, the dead stirred. Davos tapped the eastern edge. We can't hold if they strike here. Too little pitch left. And then? Sansa's gaze traced the mounds. Then we don't hold there. We feign collapse. Draw them through. Funnel them into the King's Barrow Bowl. She pointed at the depression south of the central mound. A grave waiting to swallow graves. Shieldbreaker squinted. Ground there soft. Bog under snow. Exactly, Arya murmured. Drown the whites. Water freezes over them. We torch the rim when they are trapped. A murmur of approval rose. Sansa saw Jon's eyes light with reluctant admiration. We've no oil for such a pit, Davos objected. Not oil. Arya smirked. Bones. They explained. The outer fields littered with corpses. Charred and black, but still rich with marrow grease. Wildlings knew the trick. Render fat in trench braziers, letting it drip into frozen mud to form pockets of grease that burned slow beneath a crust of ice, unseen. When torches set fire to the rim, the flames would chase the grease across the bog beneath the walkers' feet, igniting an underworld of pure heat. Ice would give. Sludge boil. The dead could not drown, but they could be pinned and burned piecemeal. Work commenced before night fell. Bodies were dragged, hacked, fed into cauldron furnaces. Sansa oversaw the logistics like a baker apportioning flour. Arya led a small strike force beyond the lines to ambush isolated groups of whites, reclaiming more sinew for trap triggers. Ghost followed at her flank. Something unspoken flowed between girl and wolf. Jon walked the perimeter repeatedly, pausing at each tower of stones to listen. From the north, a moan of wind rose and fell like distant harps of bone. He shuddered but pressed on. When he returned to the King's Barrow rim, Sansa stood alone, torch shedding a circle of honey light on alabaster snow. She stared down at the half-frozen bog where men laid carcasses. Jon stepped beside her. "Is there a line we won't cross?" she asked. He knew her mind. Rickon's face, Lyanna's broken body, the smell of burning human fat. He considered. If that line costs the living, we move it. She closed her eyes then, letting the wind lash her braid across her cheek. Father once said the man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. She turned toward him. I ordered this trap. Dot. I will light it. Meander. Jon opened his mouth to protest. Lord's duty, risk, whatever. But the resolve in her face silenced him. He nodded once. Then I'll stand beside you. The second assault began at moonrise 2 nights later. Clouds fled east, revealing a sky hard and brilliant as glass. The full moon gilded the barrows in silver, so that they glowed like frozen dunes. A hush pressed upon the ridge so profound that men whispered lest they offend something ancient. Then, as if a silent gong struck, the dead appeared. Not in waves this time, but in disciplined ranks, shoulders brushing, shields scavenged from last battle interlocked. The walkers walked among them, 7 tall shapes, and behind these towered something new. A monstrous silhouette half again, as tall as one had been, plated in shards of black ice, fused around the skeletal frame of a dead giant. Its eyes burned turquoise fires large as lanterns. In its hand it carried a tree trunk sheathed in frozen rime. With each step the trunk gouged trenches sparking blue. Davos hissed. What in 7 hells? Their siege engine? Jon replied. They watched as the dead advanced deliberately toward the southeastern trench. The very section the defenders had pretended to shore up hastily, but in truth undermined, leaving narrow causeways that looked stable yet would collapse into the bog pit. Archers knocked, torches dipped. The line waited. The moment the vanguard reached the first false palisade, Arya's signal horn shrilled, a single high note. Karstark archers loosed. Flaming shafts arced overhead. But they aimed not at the front ranks. Instead, they fell among the second and third lines, sowing confusion. Arya, leaping from shadow to shadow along the inner ditch, slit the throat of the first torchbearer at the far end, took his torch, hurled it at an oiled support. Fire blossomed up the palisade facing inward, blinding the whites jammed between outer ditch and inner ramp. Screams of the living echoed as men feigned flight down the narrow causeway. The dead followed. Sansa stood on a stone altar overlooking the depression, torch tip burning white. Jon at her side gripped a pine pitch brand and watched the causeway throng. When the front ranks reached halfway across the frozen bog, there came a groan like a mountain cracking. The ice split in spiderweb fissures. Corpses tumbled into black water. Others clambered across them, unaware, weight pressing down. 2 more steps and the whole sheet dissolved. In moments hundreds thrashed waist deep, tangled in each other's limbs. Water steamed where their unnatural cold met hidden grease fires flickering beneath. Sansa raised her torch. Jon lifted his. Together, they touched the wicks to a line of pointed stakes, thick with tallow. Fire raced along the rim of the bowl, an aureole of orange roaring skyward. Heat seared faces, eyebrows singed. Flames licked downward, found the fat rich slurry, ignited pockets that flashed like dragon breath. The lake of dead became a caldera. Blue eyes winked out by the score as bodies charred and sank. The giant of ice bellowed, a sound like glaciers grinding. It surged forward, swiping the tree club into the ditch, filling it with rubble and itself stepping across. For a breath, the defender's triumph wavered. Then Arya, perched on a mound's shoulder, flung something small, an obsidian bag ball created by Torwin's apprentices. It struck the giant's face, exploding into a constellation of black shards. The icy plating cracked. Ghostly mist vented from sockets. 2 Karstark ballista bolts struck next, punching deep into its spine. The giant swayed. Jon, sightsing the moment, vaulted a trench wall and charged, long claw gleaming. Shieldbreaker barreled beside him with an iron-bound maul. They reached the monster as its knees buckled. Jon leapt, burying Valyrian steel through the crack in its jaw, and Shieldbreaker slammed the maul into its ankle. The giant toppled outward, crashing onto a line of advancing whites, crushing them beneath tons of frozen carcass. It burst in shards of hoarfrost. A hush followed, a hole where noise should have been. Then a terrible shriek ripped across the field. The tallest of the walkers raised both arms, summoning wind so fierce torches guttered. Snow blasted sideways. Flames bent. Sansa's torch died, but the fires in the bog still raged. Jon scrambled back over the trench as ice darts formed in midair and shot toward him. He ducked. One pierced the collar of his cloak, pinning him to a post. Sansa severed the dart with her dagger. Behind them, battle renewed. Whites pressed along the north arc, unaffected by the trap. The largest walker advanced, dragging cold with every step. Frost spread across the trench water, extinguishing flames. They would breach within breaths. Then horns blew from the western horizon. 3 blasts in a rolling crescendo that made every head turn. Across the snow came shapes under moon glow. Riders red-cloaked, spears streaming banners of golden rose and sun. At their fore galloped a woman with silver hair braided about a circlet of black steel, eyes reflecting firelight. Dragons soared overhead, 3 shapes against the stars, wings beating hurricanes of snow. One roared, expelling a torrent of emerald flame that lit the Kingsbarrow fields brighter than noon. Daenerys Stormborn had come to the north. The leading dragon swept low. Its fire washed across the walker ranks. Blue bodies turned to steam. Ice swords melted to slag. The tallest walker raised a hand, conjuring sheets of sleet. But the second dragon dove, shrieking, its fire white-hot meeting sleet with such violence that molten vapor exploded outward. Shards of obsidian rained down. Daenerys reined in beside Jon and Sansa, cloak whipping. "Shall we finish this?" she asked, voice crisp. Jon tore the ice dart free from his collar. In answer, he raised Longclaw high. Sansa looked from flame-lit dragons to the woman so often named the Dragon Queen in southern rumor, and felt the gears of history align. She nodded once. Yes. A third dragon descended. Smaller. Its scales a deep crimson hue Jon had never seen. Upon its back rode a dark-haired woman in leather-dyed burnt umber. A Martell, perhaps, but brandishing a spear tipped in dragonglass. She guided the beast toward the heart of dead still pressing the north arc. Its roar drowned their moans. Fire rolled, trenches erupted anew. In that furnace light, Jon spied the walker he'd fought before. blade shattered yet still moving among burning whites, gathering blue energy in skeletal palms. He could not allow it to unleash whatever doom it hoarded. He vaulted the ditch again. Davos shouted after him, but Jon scarcely heard. He sprinted across blackened ground, spattered with water so cold it smoked, until he reached the walker's flank. It spun, jawless mouth yawning a soundless snarl. From its palms burst a spear of pure ice, glimmering. Jon dodged left, but the spear clipped his shoulder, numbing flesh. He countered with a thrust. Longclaw punched through the torso where ribs had been. The walker locked its fingers on the blade, frost crawling. For a heartbeat, they grappled. Death and life fused. Then the crimson dragon smashed down, seizing the walker in obsidian talons, lifting it high before snapping its crystal spine between jaws. The corpse burst into diamond dust. Ice spear vanished. Jon staggered back, gasping steam. Across the field, the remaining walkers retreated. Without them, the dead faltered, bodies twitching as if strings had been cut. Archers finished them. Fires consumed stragglers. Dawn clawed at the east horizon by the time the last white lay motionless. After, they gathered in the shadow of King's Barrow. Snow still drifted, but the flames cast halos of warmth. Daenerys stood flanked by Jorah Mormont and Missandei of Neath. Dragons dozing beyond with wings mantled over mountains of corpses to keep scavenger crows off. Jon, armor cracked, shoulder bandaged, greeted her with hoarse gratitude. She nodded, but her eyes never left the moaning pit where the undead had drowned. "This is only one battle," she said. "More will come," Bran's quiet voice answered. He stood beyond them, leaning on his weirwood staff, eyes pale with far knowledge. The true Night King moves against Eastwatch even now. He rides an ice dragon torn from the wall itself. "Ben the Mao of all." Daenerys' face blanched. "Viserion?" "As shaded of him," Bran murmured, yet bound to ancient hate. For a long moment, grief left its mark on her lips. Then she gathered herself. "Dragonstone's mines hold dragon glass enough for 10 armies. We will arm every hand." She looked at Jon. "If you will bend the knee, the North will have my fire." Jon opened his mouth. Pride, oath, love for his land contending. Sansa laid a hand on his wrist. Arya watched from shadow, unreadable. Jon met the Dragon Queen's eyes, saw exhaustion there, and hope. He knelt on charred earth. "The North never bends," he said. "Yet I do, for the living. My crown is yours, so long as you vow to protect my people." Daenerys closed the distance, laid her hand on his head, lifted him. "Rise then, Lord Snow, Warden of the North, Shield of the realms of men." Her voice rang across barrows once raised for ancient kings, waking echoes in stone. Sansa bowed, not low, but enough. Arya offered the ghost of a nod. Davos smiled through a mask of soot. Above them, dawn at last breached the clouds. Golden spears split the violet bruise of night and set ice shards glittering with promise. The living had won a dawn, but not yet a day. Beyond the horizon the true storm gathered, wings of darkness spanning half the world. Yet now, on this blasted ridge, the fire of 3 dragons and the unbroken will of the North forged a single front. Should ice come, it would find not scattered villages and petty lords, but a dragon-welded wall of flesh and flame. And in the broken barrows, under stones older than any tongue, the ghosts of ancient kings stirred, perhaps in warning, perhaps in blessing, as war for the long night turned like the slow axis of the world toward its final reckoning.